Welcome to episode 9 of Uncaged Sports Talk. I'm Luke Sarenko. We're here on the ninth week of Uncaged Sports Talk. Been about 2 months at this point, which is insane to me. It's insane that this has already been 2 months. Still trying to get some of the marketing for this podcast going. Still trying to grow it a bit, but that'll come as time goes. I think I mentioned that last week as well. That's the hard part of this. This is the easy part, just getting on here and talking about sports every week with you all, having you guys all listen. And it gives me a place to rant about certain topics, just talk about certain sports topics. Without further ado, though, I will introduce you all and give a background to my guest this week. My guest this week, I've been going to Eagles games with since 2017. And a bit before that, before me and my dad had season tickets, we would go to games every now and then and be at games together. But ever since 2017, him, my dad, and his dad have all been going to Eagles games together. He plays offensive tackle and defensive tackle for Wilmington Friends High School in Delaware. They're the defending state champions. They're currently 3-0, coming off of a 24-0 win against Delmar on Saturday. And they're playing Brandywine High School at home this Saturday. Logan Scott, my cousin Logan Scott, welcome on to Uncaged Sports Talk. It's a pleasure to have you. Decided to have him on this week as well because we got our first game he's going to be at this year for the Eagles versus the Commanders this weekend, which I'm very excited for.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate the
You're
warm
welcome.
welcome, and you did your research. We're playing
Yeah,
Brandywine, and we're excited for that. So thank you for that, and of course,
you're
the
welcome.
state champs thing too.
Yeah, it's it was insane watching you guys at that state championship. I was watching. The other team looks so much smaller than you guys too. It's D3 in Delaware, right?
D,
I think it's
I,
D1, D2, and D3 now.
I think it. Yeah, we were in D2, but yeah, it was definitely an unforgettable experience because like you mentioned, we were definitely bigger than the other team, but they still had some really good players. And Caravel is still really good this year too. So
Hmm.
it was definitely something I'll never forget, and yeah, it's something we're hoping to recreate this year.
He was. I'll actually let some of the listeners know. I'm gonna try to find it. I'll try to post it when this comes out if Logan's fine with it. Gonna try to find the picture after they won the state championship this past year. They were actually him and his team were actually shown on Fox Sports broadcast of the Eagles Giants game last year, the Giants game in New York, because his one of his coaches actually works for Fox, so they were shown on the Fox Sports broadcast, which was really cool. And they said the announcer said congratulations to Wilmington Friends High School and all that. I thought that was really cool. I saw it pop up and was like, "That's Logan's team." Had to pause, rewind, pause it, take a picture, send it to pop up, send it to mom and all them. Thought that was really cool. What what was your favorite moment from that season? And I'll ask you this since we go to games together. What has your favorite moment been as an Eagles fan going to games?
Well, that's honestly a really good question, and I think one of besides the obvious for my personal football experiences, besides the championship and winning it and all that, you know I think my freshman year, we had a walk-off kickoff against Mount Pleasant, or walk-off field goal by our kicker, and it was like 45, 50 yards, which is a lot in high school. So
Yeah, that's
I
insane
think
for high
that's
school.
got to be one of the most electric moments I've been a part of, at least in my own football career. And then for Eagles, going with another kick, I think you can't go wrong with Jake Elliott's 61 yarder against the Giants in 2017
I
to start that whole 7-0 or 9-0 streak. That was probably one of the most exciting moments, other than the Super Bowl, I've ever experienced as an Eagles fan.
Yeah, I did. I remember I actually didn't get to go to that Giants game. I heard stories that was a hot game.
Yeah,
Pop up
it was.
was didn't even really see the field goal. He was going
Uh-huh.
down to like get in the shade because it looked like it was going to overtime. Or they might have been down. I'm not exactly sure what the score was at the time,
It was a tie
but he was
game,
going.
but he just couldn't handle the heat. Yeah, he just had to
Yeah, it
get in
was
the
a very
shade.
hot game,
It
and my
was.
dad was like, "Where? Why are you going down there?" And then they kicked a walk-off field goal, which I wish I was at that game. But the Super Bowl trip this past year we got to go to, that that was an insane trip. Something I'll never forget. I've probably mentioned that to everyone I meet. I tell them about how insane that trip was, how fun that trip was. It's the one thing I noticed out there, and I knew it kind of before, but you really get a sense of it. It was more. It's more than just a game when you're out there. When you go to a Super Bowl, it's more than just going to the Super Bowl game. You're going for an entire weekend of events. We went to the Super Bowl Music Fest. We went to the Super Bowl experience. That was really such a fun experience going out there, seeing all that. The pep rally the day before, seeing John Clark and them do their podcast live. And then the Super Bowl, the tailgate before the Super Bowl, free alcohol, free free drinks, free food, and then the Super Bowl itself. Despite the loss, still something I'll never forget.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, that wasn't just a game. It wasn't just the Super Bowl game. It really was truly an experience that you cannot recreate anywhere else because it's just like I'm in awe every time I think back to that game, even though we lost, just because of how you know you're so nervous because you're so invested in the game and want your team to win, but at the same time there's so much going on around you, and I think the NFL does a really good job with this at
Yeah,
building an entire experience. Like you can go and be a part of like the Fox set in the during the pregame, and you can go around and there'll be some Hall of Famers walking around, and I think it's just honestly, truly one of the best sports experiences you could ever go to.
yeah. I remember we were doing. I was talking about this with someone earlier, actually, at a job I just started. We were talking about at the tailgate. There was this target throw. There was this target game. We all were trying to throw a football through a target, which that was really fun to sit in there for like 20 minutes trying to get the football through the target. There was like cornhole set up. And then in the stadium, Logan's dad, who I'll try to have him on as well with Logan again, and my dad on an episode, all four of us. But Logan's dad actually spotted Brent Selleck in the Super Bowl, which, yeah, goes back to the celebrity
Just
thing.
walking around on the concourse
Yeah, just saw
too.
him walking on the concourse as we're walking around. Like, if I would have seen him, I would have been like, "Yo, Brent, can I get a picture?" Would have been trying to get a picture with him, but yeah, it's just such a fun experience. Your emotions are all over the place during the game. Even if you're not a fan of either team, your emotions would probably be all over the place during that game. 1 second we were up here all the way at the highest emotion you can be with excitement, then you're dejected all the way down here. It was just insane feelings, roller coaster of emotions, something I'll never forget. Despite the loss, probably my favorite or it is my favorite sporting event I've ever been to. I keep track every now and then of sporting events I've been to or Eagles games I've been to. It's my number one Eagles game I've ever been to, just because the entire weekend makes it more than just the game. It's almost unfair to compare other games to going to the Super Bowl.
And that's saying a lot too, because you were at the 2017 NFC Championship game too,
Yeah.
which was, an entirely just electric experience as well.
Yeah. The two playoff games that year, the two playoff games at home this year. This year I got to be a little influenced at the game compared in 2017. I was a 17-year-old back then. You can do the math. It was 2018. I was 17, but I was 17 in January of 2018. You can do the math. So I was a little influenced at this year's NFC Championship, which made me a little more loose at the game, as a light way to put it. But it made that game just as fun. It was, even if I wasn't influenced, it would still be an insane experience at the NFC Championship. But that made it a tad bit more fun just
Exciting.
because, yeah,
Yeah.
having that looseness to yourself. But we'll pivot and go to some college football talk for a minute. Gonna keep this topic short, as some of the talk around this has died down since they lost. But down went Colorado. Colorado lost, and it turned into an avalanche real quick with how bad they got beat against Oregon and Eugene. It was it was just really bad for Oregon. Granted, they did not have Travis Hunter, but one player does not make that much of a difference getting beat the way they did against for Colorado getting beat the way they did against Oregon. 42-6. That's not a good showing for Colorado. I think they'll be fine. They'll probably wind up getting 7, 8 wins over the long course of their schedule. They still got to play Utah. They got to play USC this upcoming week, which, if they would have beat Oregon, the Colorado USC matchup may have been one of the most watched regular season college football games of all time, maybe ever, if
Yeah.
they would have beat Oregon. Because Deion Sanders, you would have had Caleb Williams, Shador Sanders. I want to know your thoughts on Colorado's season so far and how you think it's going to go the rest of the way with the
Well,
hype.
I think, for one, I've been really excited to see Colorado's success and Coach Prime's success in general. And I think it's been really good for college football in general. And it's,
Mm-hmm.
brought a lot of new fans into the sport that previously weren't as, aware of the whole college football experience, whatever you want to call it. But I think, this week, Colorado definitely got exposed by Oregon.
Yeah,
And, Oregon is definitely, they haven't been the best in past years, but they're definitely consistently one of the best teams in the country. And obviously, Colorado isn't at that level yet. They just don't have enough
they're
depth. And
yeah,
no matter how good your coaching is, there's still a very, very, very big talent gap between the two teams, even if you did have Travis Hunter. And I just think, I'm still excited to watch Colorado and USC this weekend. But I really think that, like you said, the hype has definitely died down. And that's kind of disappointing. But I'm
yeah.
still eager to see because, USC's defense is, it could definitely be improved. And I'm wondering how that affects the matchup because, Colorado's defense, I'd say, is definitely their weaker side of the ball. So it's going to be a shootout either way. And I'm excited to see how that game goes.
The ire, the ire of that matchup is a good way to put it. The ire is a good word to use for it. That's the word of the week if I'm gonna ever start making that a segment. But has worn down a bit. The ire of that matchup has worn down a bit compared to last week. I was saying if if they would have won against Oregon, probably the most watched college football game of all time. I can keep reiterating that, but I guarantee the statistics would have proven me right on that topic. Because the week prior, they had their most watched college. They had the most watched Colorado football game in 25 years. since Cordell Stewart was our QB in a game that went till 2 a.m. in the morning Eastern time. So a primetime college football game between what would have been two top 15 teams. Yeah, with Deion Sanders as a head coach, Caleb Williams. There would have been so many storylines to that game. Both undefeated teams. That would have been an insane matchup. But I'm excited just to see what Colorado does the rest of the way. They were 1-11 last year. It's hard to do anything coming from 1-11, and they already doubled their amount of wins. In their second week of the season, they doubled their amount of wins from last year. Which that's not hard to do considering you only won one game last year. But still exciting seeing that. It just adds that extra element to college football. Brings casual fans in to the sport, gives them something to follow because everyone knows who Deion Sanders is. We're going to head over to another sport, though, that Deion Sanders played. Phillies might actually be playing against his former team that he had in baseball. As they are about to clinch a playoff spot, they're going to have to get through their first round matchup against the Diamondbacks or Cubs or Marlins, just the Marlins pull that spot off. But the Phillies are looking like they're going to be, by the time this episode comes out, looks like the Phillies are going to clinch a playoff spot as they're closing in on it tonight. They're leading 2-1 last time I checked, which was about 20 minutes ago.
I
Doing
think
my
it's
research now to
2-2
check.
now, bottom
What
nine.
was that?
I think it's
2-2?
2-2 now, bottom nine.
Bottom of the ninth, 2-2. They'll still be able to pull it out. I'm not sure what the other scores are, but it would be almost statistically impossible by the time this video comes out for them not to have it clinched because the magic number for the 4 seed and a playoff spot at the time of this recording is 1 game because they have the tiebreakers over the Diamondbacks and Cubs, and the Marlins have the tiebreaker over them, but they have enough wins over the Marlins where it's the magic number still down to 1 game. So all those teams would have to somehow win the Diamondbacks, Cubs, and Marlins, with the Phillies losing the next 2 days for the Phillies not to be headed to the playoffs by the time this recording comes out. I'm excited, though, for where they're going to be headed. Hopefully, I'll be at a game next Tuesday night and then I'll be able to talk about that on episode 10. But excited with the Phillies and where they're headed. It should be a fun. It's gonna be a fun playoffs again. Very fun playoffs again. I know Logan this year. They've had him and his family had a Sunday package this year, so I'm pretty sure they'll get to go to some playoff games because the season ticket holders get first priority for tickets, so won't have to stress this year for tickets. But I want to know your thoughts on where you think they're headed.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited for these playoffs. And, there isn't really that first year kind of excitement that there was
Mm-hmm.
last year of getting in the playoffs, but they're still in the playoffs. I mean,
Yeah,
it's the second time in the last 11 or 12 years that they've actually been in the playoffs. So it's still a huge moment for this team. And I'm really eager to see, granted, if they make it past the wild card round, which I'm hoping they should do, I'm
should
really
be able
eager
to
to
do
see
it. Yeah.
that matchup between either the Dodgers or Braves because the Dodgers right now are a powerhouse. Their pitching, or at least their starting pitching, is probably their weakness, but they still have Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts. Their bullpen is amazing, and that is, obviously a juggernaut. And that's just the second best team in the NL. The Braves are complete in, I think, every single facet
Yeah.
of the game. And, I really think that, it's going to be another tough matchup, but that's going to be one of the most entertaining series of all the playoffs, regardless of who you're a fan of, because just the firepower, I think, of either offense combined with the strengths of either team's starting pitching
Mhm.
really make it an exciting matchup.
Yeah, I'm excited for potential clash with the Braves. With how MLB does it, there is no reseeding, which I think is so stupid because you're almost making it where the 3 seed is the best seed in the entire playoffs because you don't have a layoff, so you can stay hot going into the playoffs, and you're going up against the worst team in round one, with the worst team out of the two teams getting a bye in round two. You get so the Brewers, they're going to be going up against the worst wildcard team in round one. And then if they win, they get to go up against the Dodgers, which you'd rather play the Dodgers and the Braves. Unless I think in the Phillies case, I think a lot of Phillies fans would rather play the Braves just because of last year. And it's a shorter series, so I'd take my chances in a shorter series with the Braves compared to a 7-game series. It's looking like the Phillies are going to be headed for that matchup with the Braves once this podcast comes out and the Braves clinch as well. But should be an exciting series. I think formula is the same as last year. Get one on the road and then come back to Philly for game 3 and 4 and see what you do there. At least get one, and then you get at least 2 games in the series, and then you either win in game 4 or you win in game 5. But should be an exciting series. If they do have that matchup again, I don't think it goes 4. I think it goes 5 no matter who wins, because I think it's going to be a clash of both teams. I think the Braves would start out slow just because of the break. Having that layoff before a playoff series certainly hurts, can certainly throw off some of your timing, and can give the other team an edge, can give the team that played 3 games in a wild, 3 games in a wild card round an advantage in
Yeah,
the
and
early beginnings of the series.
I think the Braves have a little bit of an advantage going into this year, obviously because they're the more talented team, but also they know what happened last year and they know what to expect now when heading into
Yeah.
Philly for games 3 and 4. Because last year they looked totally unprepared for the chaos that they were put in with the Philly fans and that entire environment. And they just looked shell shocked the entire series. I really think that this year is going to be a much closer matchup because of the fact that not only are they prepared, but they're also a better team on paper than they were last year. And
Mm-hmm.
the main pitcher who got teed off on in game 3 of last year, Spencer
He's
Strider,
healthy.
has been on a
Yeah.
tear this year, and he's actually leading the NL in strikeouts. So
And
I'm interested to see how their pitching staff does in Philly in games 3 and 4 and how, they're affected by the
yeah.
fans in that chaotic environment.
And with back to Strider for a second, he's healthy compared to last year. That's the one thing
Exactly.
people forget last year. He was dealing with an injury, had been pulled from a game, I believe. This is good long term memory. I'm not sure which game it was. Not that good of long term memory, but I'm pretty sure a week or two prior he had been pulled from a game early due to him coming off of an injury recently, and he was still dealing with it. So, and then he was thrown into game 3 into the jungle, as Nick Castellanos said. He was thrown into the jungle, and once Reese hit that home run, there was no going back for Strider, no coming back from that for Strider in that game. They were screwed once Reese hit that home run. But should be an exciting playoffs. I'm excited to see where it heads. Getting excited for that clash. I think a lot of Phillies fans are, because I think that people want to beat the better team. They want to be able to have that matchup against the Braves and try to pull that off again. Is if you beat the Braves, you you and the Dodgers are could you have got a good better chance than you did last year at the World Series if you beat the Braves. The Dodgers will be no no cupcake. They'll still be a tough competition, but you'll have an easier chance last year at winning the World Series. The Braves are last year's Astros to a degree. but the Braves are the team to get past, and your path becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, and I will say that if the team that does get to the World Series, the AL doesn't look that great this year. Like they
Yeah.
have a lot of talent, but it's very evenly divided between teams, and there's no one real juggernaut that you can
Hmm.
pick out of because the Rangers were leading the AL West by so many games back in July, heading into August, and now they're still fighting for that spot and might not even get into the wild card. So I really think that obviously the Astros are still probably going to make it. You might have the Mariners in there, maybe the Blue Jays, but there's no one team that just jumps off the charts and really, you know, screams contender like the Braves or the Dodgers or even a little bit the Phillies.
Yeah.
And I just think that, once you actually get there, that might honestly be the easiest series of the playoffs besides the wild
Hmm.
card.
Yeah, I think the two easiest series for the Phillies, that wild card, they played the Diamondbacks in Arizona this year. They swept them in Arizona. So coming to Philly in a raucous environment should be 2-0 sweep. They played the Cubs in Chicago. I believe when I was looking at that, they won the series 2-1. They may have actually swept them as well. I think it was 2-1 though. I'm double checking real quick doing the research. But
I think you're
they
right.
should be able to beat the Cubs in 3 in Philly. Yeah, they swept the Cubs in Chicago. So you should be able to beat the Cubs in the first two games in Philly. So I'm fine with both of those matchups. And then you got the Braves. That's the toughest team to get through. If you get through the Braves and then you can get past the Dodgers, the World Series will be easier than those last two matchups, and you'll be battle tested. You'll be the most battle tested team going in there because the Braves series would probably go 5 if you get past it, and the Dodger series six or 6 or 7 games. I feel like it would be a 6 game series, just depending on which side. But it could also go 7. Both teams very talented. And last time the Phillies won the World Series, they played the Dodgers. Granted, one of the last times they lost, though, they played the Dodgers as well. But it'll be a little throwback to those 2008, 2009 years playing the Dodgers again to get to
Who
the World
knows? Maybe
Series.
we'll see the Rays again.
That would be that would be funny. I'd go put $1,000 on the Phillies at that point. It would be almost storybook. We're gonna pivot though to another Philly team and react to Week 3. I want to know your thoughts on Monday night's game and how the team's looking going forward into Sunday against the Commanders.
I think that one of the things that really jumped off the screen to me in watching last night's game was the line. I obviously
Hmm.
I'm biased because I'm a lineman and I have a little bit of love for both sides of the line, but just the dominance of both the O line and D line last night was incredible. There was a Pro Football Focus tweet where it just showed that I think DeAndre Swift had 5 yards on either side of him on that one play where he hurdled the Buccaneers defender. Just the unbelievable just dominance by not only the O line but the D line. We talk about the safety last night. Obviously,
Hmm.
the D line got a great push, and I really want to say that the D line has honestly elevated the play of the linebackers so far this year
Yeah.
because Zach Cunningham and Morrow and even Nakobe Dean, even though he's injured, they were big question marks coming into the year, but they've been more than serviceable. And honestly, I've been really surprised by Sean Desai's, not so much his game plans, but just by his success because I didn't think that his system was going to be too much different from Gannon's.
Mhm.
but it seems like an entirely different defense this year, and I'm really excited to see as the season goes on, how that affects the success of the team. The one dark spot I think I will say, even though I didn't think it was too concerning, was Jalen Hurts' performance.
Mm.
Obviously, that's what everyone's focusing on. I think that, even though obviously on the box score it said he had 2 picks, the one was just a miscommunication with
Yeah.
Swift, and the other, I think he just underthrew the ball a little bit. Tough play, safety made a really good play, and they got a safety the next play anyways, so it didn't matter too much. I just think that, obviously he was dealing with an illness last night too, so that may have affected his
Jalen Hurts flu
performance.
game.
Exactly. But, you know, I just think he's making the plays that need to be made, and he's not, making reads immediately, and he doesn't seem like he's totally comfortable yet just as a pocket passer, but he's doing what needs to be done, and he's just doing he's managing the game, which is honestly, with
Mhm.
all the talent around him, all we need right now. We don't need him to be an MVP candidate for this team to succeed. Obviously, we'd love if he was, because that just makes our dangerousness that much worse. But I feel like, he doesn't have to be a superstar or play like a superstar every single week for the Eagles to have success going forward.
Yeah, I was very excited about the game last night. I keep reiterating it on this podcast, and I'll say it over and over again until about week 4, week 5. If they struggle again this week or next or after week 5 as well, then it'll become a real concern for me. But it's only week 3. Who? Eagles have an easy schedule for the first 6 weeks of the season before their first tough test, which will be the Dolphins. That's their toughest test on their schedule to start the year. They have the Commanders this weekend. They have the Rams next weekend, and then they have the Jets. That should be a 6-0 start. Should. That's why I'm not really concerned about the offense yet. The offense looked okay. Hurts has some stuff to clean up, but he's also learning a new system, and you have the time to get it right. You just have to keep finding ways to win games. And that's all it really is in the beginning of the season. A lot of teams nowadays struggle in the beginning of the season. You saw the Chiefs the first 2 weeks of this year did not look like the normal Chiefs. This past week, they put up 41 points because they finally found a rhythm. Players don't play in preseason anymore. And the first 3 weeks is almost those players getting their feet back under them, getting their bodies back to actual playing condition. Sure, training camp should help with that, but there's nothing like an actual game compared to training camp. Actual game is a completely different beast, especially when you have hopes of potentially getting back to a Super Bowl. Your expectations are through the roof. But the Eagles so far, each week, they've met each of my expectations for each game. The first week I predicted 23-17. I predicted it close, low scoring. It was about a 6-point game against the Vikings. I predicted 27-21. Another 6-point game. Close. I predicted it to be close. That's what it was about. It was a little more high scoring than I thought it would be. But same point differential just about. It was 34-28. And this past week, I predicted 34-21. It's about the same point differential. I predicted a 13-point differential. Eagles won by a 12-point differential. Not It's just about my expectations so far. They've met my expectations every week. And this week is where I think they show out. I think this is their week where they go and show, okay, our offense, it'll be fine. You got the Commanders coming up, which I think they roll over the Commanders. But back to Monday night, Jalen Carter. He might be the best defensive tackle in football right now already in 3 weeks into his career. He might be the best defensive tackle right now in football. He's getting double teamed and he's still getting pressure. It's opening up stuff for Fletcher Cox, making Fletcher Cox look. Fletcher Cox isn't getting double teamed anymore. It's making Fletcher look like he's.
It looks like he's a rookie
28
again.
years
It's
old.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's making Jordan Davis look that much better because Jordan Davis is getting one-on-ones against centers, against guards. And Jordan Davis in a one-on-one situation, not many people can block a guy that size, that fast, with those kinds of measurables that Jordan Davis has. It's just opening up so many other stuff for the interior. Sure, you'd like to see the edge get a little more pressure because it's a lot of this pressure is coming from the interior currently. Like Hassan Reddick hasn't done anything yet. Nolan Smith, he had the big play on Monday night. Brandon Graham hasn't really done what he did last year to this point yet. But they should be able to get it going eventually. They just need to find their legs and get their legs under them, get themselves in a rhythm. Because you have that interior pressure, it makes it that much easier on your edge rushers, and your edge rushers will figure it out. Hassan Reddick's battling with the thumb injury, but he'll figure it out. He'll get used to playing with it right now. And the defense looked really good. Reed Blankenship, he looks really good in his time starting so far, coming back from the rib injury this week. My guy, he was on Luke's list on one of my first episodes this year on the top players to watch in preseason. Britton Covey, my guy with the punt return, one of my favorite players. I remember all of us getting hype at the Super Bowl when he had a decent return. We were all hyped because every game when you're there, it looks like he gets his head taken off. And then he just gets right back up. He doesn't quit. Now, he had a little blunder at the Thursday night football game. He had to drop punt, but then he completely made up for it this week on Monday Night Football with the 58-yard return. And he had another good return. He's one of my favorite players on the team. He's probably top 5 for me just because he's a small, tough guy who doesn't give up, which everyone loves those little underdog stories. I'd like to see him maybe get like a player or two at receiver just to see what he can do. Because in training camp last year, I think it was Barrett Brooks of NBC Sports Philadelphia, said he reminded him of Wes Walker. And not expecting him to be Wes Walker or anything. Those are high praises, but still want to see what he can do with a player or two in the slot. Maybe if he can get open on a route, because he is that type of player. He's a shiftier player who can make those cuts. Want to see him at receiver, even if it's just for a play. Like if you're in a blowout game against the Commanders, throw him in there. See what he can do for a play or two. Give him two targets. And Hurts, I think it's just a matter of the offense just trying to find itself still. He'll find it eventually. And you have 3 more weeks to do it before you want your offense rolling for that Dolphins game. Because if you go into that Dolphins game and your offense is still struggling, that game could get ugly quick with how good the Dolphins offense looks right now. They put up 70 points without Jalen Waddle. Sure, they're not going to put up 70 points again, probably this season, but they put up 70 points without Jalen Waddle. That's scary. Very scary of an offense, but we'll get into them shortly. Before we pivot to Luke's power rankings, Luke's list NFL power rankings, and our locks for the week, I want to ask Logan his prediction this week for this Eagles game. What is your score prediction for Sunday?
My score prediction, obviously, I have the Eagles winning and not by a very close margin. I think the Commanders aren't as good as the Buccaneers, and I also think that it's not going to be that much of a competition. And I really think, like you said, that the offense is going to figure out, the missing pieces that they have to plug in to really start firing on all cylinders this week. And I really think that this is the week that we start to see the true identity of this Eagles team and what, this Eagles team is really capable of. And that's why I have the Eagles by a landslide 38-17.
Oh, 30, just about the same score prediction. We're not far off on our score predictions, 3 points off. 7 points off on the Commander's score, 4 points off. But I'll say that real quick, and then I'll mention one more thing. I'll say my prediction. Luke's pick this week, 34-10. The Eagles roll the Commanders in their second home game of the season, 1 o'clock. Second, only our first 1 o'clock game this year, which is insane that it's our first 1 o'clock game this year in week 4. But we only have 2 home games at 1 o'clock this year. This weekend against the Cardinals in week 16, which is insane to me. But the Eagles roll over the Commanders in South Philly, 34-10, and get an impressive win. This is where they look like those other teams have to start the season, where they have their statement win, like the Chiefs had this week, like the Niners have had so far in their season, like the Cowboys had early in their season. I think that's why a lot of the panic has been for the Eagles. I think a lot of the panic has come from people more being worried about the other teams, at least for me. Like, I'm not really panicking, but it's just a slight worry about the Niners because they look really good. And it's before the Cowboys lost to the Cardinals this week. And they lost Trayvon Diggs. It was a slight worry about the Cowboys because whether Eagles fans like to admit it or not, they looked really good too. They looked like one of the top 4 best teams before this past week, which I think that's where a lot of the frustration from the Eagles was coming from because they weren't putting up games like that. They were only winning by a few points here and there. And while those teams were winning in blowout victories, that I think the Eagles will be fine though. I think as long as you keep pace with those teams, you'll be fine. And that's the goal. Just keep pace and get the number 1 seed eventually. Don't let those other teams gain ground and get the number 1 seed.
And I think one thing that also some Eagles fans might be doing is they're comparing this team too much to last year's team. Obviously, there's a lot of the same parts of last year's team that are on this year's team, a lot of the same players, some new schemes, but for the most part, it's a very similar team. But I feel like that this year just has a different feel to it. And I'm not saying that in the way that it's special, because obviously it's way too early in the season to really tell, what a team is fully capable of. But this team does feel different from last year. And I think that, they've really harped on that this year is a new year and they have to reprove themselves because every week is 0-0 and all that sort of stuff. But I really think that, they have reestablished themselves down to their core identities of running the ball, RPO offense, and then the dominant defense on the other side of the ball. Last year, it was more of a spread option look, and I don't think it was. I feel like this year you can definitely feel that there is a different sort of thing going on in that locker room.
I think a lot of it is with the locker room and all. I think this year they know that there's really only one goal for this season. Last year, we would have been excited if the team went 12-5 and they made it to the division round. Sure, it would have hurt if they lost in the playoffs, but going into last year, the expectations were different. You wanted to see Hurts improve last year. You wanted to see what they could do. This year, there's only one goal. People are going to be disappointed if that goal doesn't happen for the most part this year. I think that's the main difference in this year, and I think the team feels that. which I think is where the frustration is also coming from. But in the last 15 minutes of the show, we're going to pivot to Luke's list in the NFL Power Rankings. And before that, I want to let you all know to head over and visit my friend Dan the Man Stanley at Sheridan Nissan, where they will hook you up with a new car. Just let them know Luke Sarenka and Uncaged Sports Talk sent you. Now for Luke's list. Trending up at number 10 is the Cleveland Browns. They trend up 7 spots this week after their win they had. And then trending up is the New England Patriots. They trend up 7 spots as well after they pulled off some wins this week. Both teams look very impressive. Browns winning 27-3 against the Titans. The Titans have been all over the place in my power rankings for me. They've been so up, they've been down a lot. But the Browns looked very impressive even after losing Nick Chubb. A 27-3 victory in a week that there were many blowouts. Their win was one of the more impressive wins. The Patriots, they move up just because they finally got a win. And their defenses look good through the first few weeks. Granted, they just played Zach Wilson. But their defenses look solid against 2 decent teams they played to start the season. They played the Dolphins. They only gave up 24 points, I believe, to the Dolphins. And they only gave up 24 points to the Eagles, which is a high-powered offense. The Patriots have looked okay to start this season, and they trend up since they finally got out of the loss column. Trending down at number 29 is the Denver Broncos. They looked horrible. 70-20 is all I need to say about the Broncos. Give me a second, listeners. Sorry.
Yeah, and I will say that Broncos game, I think, is for a team that's trying to change the culture and really trying to redefine themselves after the whole mess that was last year. That's just inexcusable.
Yeah.
70-20 in modern football in the NFL is just unheard of, and I don't think embarrassing is enough of a word to describe what happened. And I think that
Only reason. What was that? Keep going.
All I was going to say is no matter what success they have this year, short of winning the Super Bowl, this Broncos team will be looked at as a disappointment, just because that just cannot happen in the National Football League. There's just no other way to put it.
That's a college score, 70-20. 70 points doesn't happen in NFL football, pro football. The only reason they're not lower is just because there's teams that are worse below them. You got the Bears. I think the Raiders are a bit worse. The Raiders, I believe, the Raiders did beat them week 1, but I still think the Broncos are overall a better team than the Raiders. They got more talent. On paper, they should be better than those teams, than the Raiders, but they're definitely better than the Bears. The Bears are the worst team in football. And then the team at 30, I'm going to double check it. I will post it this week so people can see. At the end of every month, I will keep people updated on my full power rankings. But at 30, I'm double checking that as we speak. I'm not exactly sure who it is right now. I'm going to keep this moving, though, because we're running short on time. And I will post it. People will get to see. But there's some teams below the Broncos that are just putrid. The Broncos look putrid after that, but that's the only reason they're not the worst team after a 70-20 beatdown. At number 10 is the Cleveland Browns. I stated my reasons for them at 10. At number 9 is the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are headed in a good direction with Dan Campbell, coming off of a good win against the Falcons. 20-6, I believe the final score was, which it's a very good win for the Lions, starting 2-1 this year. Good win for the Lions. They got some talent on offense. Amon Ra. You got Jahmyr Gibbs looking good there at running back. Outshine Bijan, who was picked higher than him in the draft. Bijan, I still think, is a better running back, but the Lions are looking good. Their defense is a little suspect still, but they had a really good game this past week, and can't take anything away from them this past week. They deserve all the credit for the win they had this week, only giving up 6 points. Coming in at number 8 is the Cincinnati Bengals. They don't go up or down. They stay right at 8. They still look a little sluggish on offense. But again, it's only week 3 and Joe Burrow has a calf injury currently. He's still fighting through. But they don't move up because they still look sluggish as a team. Jamar Chase finally got off on a good note, which is a positive thing to see it if you're a Bengals fan. Jamar Chase getting going. But you still want to see them put it together. They're in kind of the same situation the Eagles are in, just not the 3-0 situation. That their offenses look offensively, they're in that same situation because their offenses look sluggish to a degree. But they still come in at 8. They still have the talent. They'll be fine when it comes down to it. They'll be one of the top 3-4 teams in the AFC when we get to the latter part of the season.
The Bengals, they've looked, like you said, sluggish on offense, and their defense hasn't been much better. But I don't know. They started last year 0-2, and obviously they made it all the way late into the playoffs. So I think it's just the nature of, like you kind of talked about earlier, that whole no one really plays preseason games anymore, so that definitely plays a part on it. I just think that, they don't look great, but they're still the Bengals. They still got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins.
Joe Mixon.
There's Joe Mixon.
Yeah.
They'll pick it up eventually.
Yeah. Coming in at number 7 is a team who beat them a week ago, the Baltimore Ravens. Their injuries still concern me. Losing to the Colts usually would take a hit, but there's other teams that dropped. And I still think they're better than the Bengals, Lions, and Browns. But the Ravens come in at number 7 this week. They don't go up or down. They should have honestly beat the Colts, but had a late non-pass interference call. That was more egregious than a lot of pass interference calls you see thrown out there. But the Ravens stay at 7. The Cowboys dropped 3 spots in my power rankings, coming in at number 6. The Cowboys lose. Thank you, Jonathan Gannon. I will say that. Thank you, JG, Jonathan Gannon. Philly fans may hate you, but I love you. You just beat the Dallas Cowboys and made them 2-1. Now Cowboys fans are silent. But in all seriousness, the Cowboys are number 6. They're still a really good team. It was just I think a letdown of a game. Their team was dejected coming off of losing Trayvon Diggs for the season, which plays a larger role than people are going to give it credit for. You lost one of your captains, one of your leaders for the season. They were dejected, and I think the Cardinals caught them, and the Cowboys didn't know how to respond. The Cowboys are also a team. If they fall behind, Dak is going to have to throw the ball. And Dak hasn't really had to throw the ball through the first 2 weeks. He finally had to throw the ball this week, and it turned into a pick in the end zone, which led to them losing their first game. Coming in at number 5 is the Buffalo Bills, coming off of a beatdown against the Commanders. Hopefully the Eagles can put up that type of beatdown. We both kind of expect that type of beatdown this week. But the Buffalo Bills coming in at number 5. They started lower on the list after their week 1 loss to the Jets and Zach Wilson, because Rodgers didn't even play. But the Bills coming at number 5, slowly creeping back up the list, slowly making a good impression on Luke's list. Coming in at number 4, the 49ers. They do not go up or down. They stay at number 4 this week. The Niners look good, but they let the Giants stay in the game longer than the Giants should have stayed in that game last Thursday night. They still won by a good margin, but it was close until the fourth quarter. Then they started to pull away. That game should not have been close after the first quarter. Their offensive line still a little eh. Their defense is good, but the Niners are the one team. If you let get a lead, you're not getting back in that game if the Niners get a lead. Niners are winning the game 95 out of 100 times if they get a lead to start, because then their defense is going to feast. They can get play action going with CMC and Christian McCaffrey, and it makes it that much easier on Brock Purdy. You don't want, if it was 7-game series in football, if the Niners got a lead first in every game, the Niners would have win in 4 or 5, no matter who they're playing. They're that type of team you don't want to let get a lead. Coming in at number 3 is the Kansas City Chiefs. They drop a spot, but only because one of the teams rose up 4 spots on this list. The number 1 team rose up 4 spots. Kansas City Chiefs, after their dominant win, they got back headed in the right direction. If it wasn't for the other team rising up, the Chiefs would still be at 2, and the number 2 team would still be at 1. But the Chiefs dropped to 3 currently. They had a dominant win. Chiefs are headed back in the right direction, 41-10 against the Bears. And then at number 2, the Eagles. We already got into the Eagles. The Eagles come in at number 2. They drop a spot, but only because one of the teams rose 4 spots with the impressive win. And that number 1 team, the Miami Dolphins. I'm pretty sure they're going to be number 1 in every power rankings after this week. There's 3-0 teams left. Dolphins and Eagles again, and the Niners are added to the mix. The Dolphins are the best team in football right now, coming off of a 70-20 win. Their defense is better than last year. Their running game looks better than last year with A-Chain and Mostert. They didn't even have Waddle for the 70-20 victory. The Dolphins currently are the best team in football. I hate to admit it that the Eagles dropped, but I got to be unbiased and put the Dolphins at number 1 because they're clearly the best team right now in all of football. Before we make it some quick picks for the week, what is your thoughts on reaction to this list?
I'd say the one thing that I am a little bit surprised about is the Niners being that low. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
The Dolphins being where they are, I think they're the uncontested number 1. But, there is still some wiggle room because the Eagles have not played to their ceiling yet. So I'm as big of an Eagles fan as the next guy, but I don't know if they're quite the number 2 yet, in my opinion. I'd probably have the Chiefs and Niners still over the Eagles. But after that, pretty much it's the same with me that you have up here. And there's really no other argument other than maybe the Browns and Ravens are interchangeable just because of the fact that besides being division rivals, they've had similar schedules. And I think that, the Browns, Deshaun Watson has had a rough start, but last week was arguably his best game as a Brown, even if the numbers don't truly show it. So I think I'm a little bit higher on the Browns. Other than that, you can't really argue with this list.
Yeah, my biggest thing with the Niners at 4, the reason I got the Eagles ahead of them is just because it's still week 3 and teams are going to look sluggish. So I don't want to have overreactions and huge jumps on the list. This week, lower on the list, I had some huge jumps just because a lot of teams look bad this week. And you have a good basis of data now, a solid basis of data. But Eagles are still 3-0. They're finding ways to win. That's the name of the game, at least early on. It hasn't been sexy, as a way to put it, but they're still getting the job done. Niners, it's been sexy from them, but they're both still got the same record. So at that point, I'd just tend to go with the better roster since it's still early. The better roster tends to lean towards the Eagles. over the Chiefs and the Niners. The Eagles have the better roster in both scenarios, which is why I still got them at number 2. But the Niners are playing better right now, but the Eagles are still arguably a better team. I try to do it based on team, and I give a few week cushion. Like, if the Eagles struggle against the Commanders, they're dropping. They might drop below the Bills if they struggle against the Commanders this week. Because it's also about expectations heading into games. If a team meets expectations, they probably stay put. If a team exceeds expectations, they rise. And if a team does not meet expectations, they are dropping. As you can see with a lot of these teams. The Browns exceeded my expectations this past weekend, the Patriots, so on. So that's how a lot of these teams tend to rise and fall. We are going to get into Luke's list and Luke's locks and Logan's locks to wrap up the show. We'll try to make that quick as we're over the hour mark for the first time ever. But Luke's locks, Eagles -8.5. We got into that already. Eagles should roll. The Chiefs on Sunday Night Football against the Jets -9.5. That should be a win for the Chiefs. Should be able to pull that off -9.5. I like the Chiefs there a lot. The Jets, Zach Wilson stinks, straight up stinks. Not a good quarterback, and that's hindering the Jets. And they're just in downright spiral mode right now. And the Chiefs look like the Chiefs of old last week, putting up 41 points. The Vikings -3.5 against the Panthers. I feel like that's a trap line, but the Vikings are also 0-3. It could be a trap line. That's the one thing that scared me on that game. Vegas almost wants you to pick the Vikings because they know a lot of people will pick the Vikings -3.5 against the Panthers. But the Vikings should be able to pull that game off. They're the more talented team. They just need to clean up their turnover issues and have better clock management than they had at the end of that Chargers game, because that was putrid clock management. That was horrible clock management by whatever that was. And it saved Brandon Staley's job. Because I think if the Vikings win that game, Brandon Staley would have been fired at 0-3. Brandon Staley would have maybe been fired if the Vikings won the game, Brandon Staley may have been fired with the decision he had to go for it on that 4th down. Because that was one of the most dumb decisions I've seen in a long time. Rams +1.5. I think the Rams pull off the win this week against the Colts. Colts, sure, they beat the Ravens. Shane Steichen's look good, but the Rams still have some talent. They're getting Cooper Kupp back next week, which I'm excited to see. But the Puka Nacua has been doing good for them. They got Kyron Williams, who's taken one of the lead back roles there in Los Angeles. I got the Rams beating the Colts straight up. The Rams have more talent overall than the Colts. They still got Aaron Donald there in Los Angeles. They win that game +1.5. Then I got the Giants at -1.5. The Giants, they're playing the Seahawks. Both teams are right on an even tier, but the Giants are at home. I think the Giants get back on a good track right now. The Giants are headed in I think they get back on a good track and start heading to the team that people expected them to be. I think they'll be a 10-7 team, 9-8 team when it's all said and done. They're only 1-2, despite how bad they looked in week 1. And this past week, they looked okay for how bad they lost. They looked okay for the expectation you had for the game. Got ugly late, but Giants win against the Seahawks. They're both going to be both teams hovering around the same record all year long. I think the Giants get to 2-2 and the Seahawks fall to 2-2.
Yeah, I think that the Giants Seahawks game is probably the most 50-50 game of all these picks. Like, that could go either way. For the most part, I feel like most of these are safe, but that, they're two very even teams, and, they're still trying to, make a name for themselves, because they're definitely flying under the radar with teams like the Dolphins and the Eagles and the Niners. So I think that's going to be one of the most interesting games of the week.
Now we will get into Logan's Locks of the week. First ever edition of Logan's Locks. I've been making names for people, but Logan's Locks rhymes. For I've done Mike's best bets, Mark's best bets. Logan's Locks works better because you got the L, so it works a lot better. Here's Logan's Locks, and I'll let him go over and give his explanation for each.
So obviously we talked about the Eagles, and I think there's no question about -8.5. That's just, you know, honestly a generous line. Um, Next, the Dolphins +2.5, which I find very surprising because even after all of their dominance through these first three games, they're still the underdogs versus the Bills. And that honestly might be a steal of a bet from Vegas there. I think that,
Mhm.
though historically the Dolphins have not been as good against the Bills, I think that with the way that the Dolphins offense is humming right now, there's no question that they take this game, even if Josh Allen puts up 400 yards. I still think that the Dolphins offense has enough to overcome what shortcomings their defense may have.
That
Next,
game
which is a little, go ahead.
that game gives me vibes of like a race to 40. First team to hit
Exactly.
40 wins that game. That
Exactly.
gives me like 41-35 type
Yeah,
feel.
it's going to be a shootout for sure. The next pick I have Bengals, which is a little bit of a surprise, but they're playing the Titans, and Titans have not looked good this year, and the Bengals, although they're coming off a shaky win against the Rams, I really think that they still have a lot of room to grow, and that they're going to only get better as the season goes on. So Bengals -2.5 is a solid take there, and honestly, the, with the way the Titans have been playing, I think that's a solid bet.
All right, tell me what
Forty-Niners.
what's hard.
I mean, there's no question here. It's the Niners. I,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no contest. They're going to win unless a miracle happens. And same thing with the Chiefs. Chiefs are playing the Jets. Not a good
Yeah,
team. Zach Wilson
we
is
both had the Chiefs
not awful.
on our locks.
So I honestly, the last two are probably the safest of all of the bets here, even with the Eagles, because there's still a little bit of wiggle room there.
The one pushback I would give with the Niners is 13.5 is a large spread. The Cardinals are supposed to be one of the worst teams in football, but they have been very competitive in their first 3 weeks. They beat the Cowboys, who were talked about up there with the Niners as one of the top three teams last week. They were talked about as one of the top three teams. I had them at third last week, the Cowboys, in my power rankings. And the Cardinals have been competitive in their first 3 weeks. Very competitive, exceeding expectations. So 13.5 is a little sketchy to me. So that's why I laid off of that. The Niners should be able to win by more than that. But the way the Cardinals have been playing, I could see it coming out to like a 10-point game. Niners only winning by 10. That's the only pushback I would give on the locks. Otherwise, I like them. But that'll do it for this episode of Uncaged Sports Talk. Before we close out on today's show, I want to do my first ever breaking news on this show. Mark Farzetta did it 2 weeks ago. I have a little breaking news to announce for any Phillies fans. I don't know if you looked at the score yet, Logan,
I
but the
did.
Phillies have clinched the 4 seed, have clinched a playoff spot at the time of this recording. Sure, we kind of expected that, but at the time we're recording this, the Phillies are headed to the playoffs, and they will be hosting next Tuesday night in South Philadelphia against the Diamondbacks, Cubs, or Marlins. Hopefully, the Diamondbacks. Diamondbacks or Cubs. I don't want to see the Marlins just because it's a divisional matchup, and that's when
Yeah.
things can get dicey. But the Phillies are headed back to the playoffs. That'll do it on this edition of Uncaged Sports Talk. Tune in next week. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow on all of our platforms. It was great to have you, Logan. I look forward to having you on again in the future. Next time, maybe have your dad, you, and me, and my dad on. My dad will have to sit next to me for it, but
Yeah.
look forward to having you on again in the future. And everyone remember to like, subscribe, and comment on all of our platforms and follow us on all of our platforms. It is greatly appreciated. Tune in next week to Uncaged Sports Talk.